Good morning. This is Dr. Joe Kraft with the Medical Minute, and it's a beautiful morning here in Central Texas. I was just having my coffee, and I was thinking about something that I actually saw on the television series The Pit, which is about an emergency room in Pittsburgh, and it's pretty popular right now. And so I started watching that series, and I think it was in episode 3 or something like that. They had a situation. I'm not going to spoil it for you. I know it's a good thing to watch. I don't want to spoil it, but they had a case about fentanyl overdose, and it reminded me of how common this is. And I was on shift 2 days ago, and I don't talk about my cases very much, but I think this is worth talking about because I don't think people realize how serious fentanyl is in the world today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a case that I had. We were all in the ER. I think it was kind of late afternoon, and and a U-Haul van pulled up to the ER, and they needed help getting somebody out of the front seat of the van. Um, so mind you, I'm in a very small ER for this shift, which we don't have a lot of staff, and we don't normally get a lot of ambulances or a lot of trauma. But so they needed help getting somebody out. So we go out there with a wheelchair and get our gloves on, and but we're out there within seconds, and we open up the passenger door, and there's a guy buckled in his underwear, probably weighs about 220, and he's completely unconscious, slumped over, agonal breathing, meaning he's just barely breathing, and all sweaty and pale, kind of grayish. And he does have a pulse. We get him. We try to get him out of that seat and into a wheelchair so that we can wheel him into the exam room right away. We didn't know we needed to have a stretcher out there, and it took quite a bit of effort to get this sweaty guy out of the vehicle and into a wheelchair and into a room and up onto the stretcher. And anyway, to make a long story not quite so long, it was a fentanyl overdose, and he was completely unconscious, barely breathing. His oxygen saturations were in his 60s. He still had a pulse. As soon as we unloaded him from the vehicle, the people that brought him drove away. We did get his driver's license, though, before they left. And that's not uncommon. It's actually fairly common for somebody to just drop somebody off for them to get some medical attention, but they're not going to stick around because of the risk of the legal issues. Anyway, so we get the guy into the ER, and he's got pinpoint pupils. Well, in the ER, we use IV Narcan or naloxone to reverse fentanyl overdose. And so we put in an IV, gave him some naloxone, and within 20, 30 seconds, he was wide awake. But it just reminded me of how important it is for people to, one, recognize when somebody's had an overdose, and two, be prepared, because this guy literally only had a couple more minutes before he would have been dead. And I'm very thankful that his friends, or whoever they were, brought him in when they did. But the life-saving drug, naloxone, is actually available in a nasal spray over the counter. And I think it's important, if you happen to be in those circles where somebody might overdose, usually not even intentionally. It's a lot of times they're not intentionally taking fentanyl, but the fentanyl is laced into whatever they're taking. And so it's real easy to overdose on fentanyl. And so I started to kind of look it up to see how much fentanyl it takes to knock out a full-grown person. Well, in the emergency room, we use fentanyl, and ambulances use fentanyl, and it's dosed in micrograms. But an average grain of salt weighs about 50 micrograms. So the typical dose of fentanyl is 50 to 100 micrograms of fentanyl. And that's what's given by EMS guys when they're bringing in somebody who has a broken leg where the bone's sticking out of the leg. They give them 50 to 100 micrograms of fentanyl. Well, that means that they're giving about as much as 1 or 2 grains of salt. That's how much fentanyl we're talking about. So you can imagine it doesn't take a lot of fentanyl to be laced into a tablet. Maybe somebody's taken an alprazolam or Xanax that they got from a friend off the street, something to help calm the nerves or to help them feel good or something, and it's laced with fentanyl, and they overdose. Well, if you're not real close to an emergency room, the chances are they're not going to make it unless somebody has Narcan. So that's why I point this out, because I think it's important for people to realize how common this is. Literally hundreds of people die daily in the US from fentanyl overdose. And it's usually not something that they were meaning to take. It's usually laced into it by the drug dealers. And they do it just to watch it happen. So I'm just pointing it out that it doesn't take a lot of fentanyl. It does occur. It's not just on the TV shows. We see it in real life. And it's fairly preventable if we just have somebody around us that's got Narcan. I mean, it's definitely a lifesaver. It comes in a nasal spray. You just squirt it up in their nose, and within 20 or 30 minutes, 20, 30 seconds, they wake up. And it lasts for probably 20 or 30 minutes. It keeps them conscious. And that gives you time to get them to an emergency room. Now, I will remind you that if somebody overdoses and you give them Narcan up the nose and they wake up, they're not going to want to go to the emergency room. But you have to realize that the Narcan doesn't last nearly as long as the fentanyl does. And so in about 30 minutes or so, they're going to be back where they were. And so you have to convince them that they need to go in and be treated with more long-acting medications and treatments in order to keep them from going right back to where they were. Anyway, I know this was a lot longer talk than I wanted to do. And I'm going to get back to the autism talk that I promised you. But I just thought, there's too many things happening around me that's telling me that I need to talk a little bit about fentanyl. So again, and I did a video one time talking about the difference between, or the difference of saying fentanyl the correct way. It's not fentanyl like you'll hear in the news. It's fentanyl, YL. So anyway, that's the update on fentanyl, is that it is a very common overdose, and you can save lives with a nasal spray. So it's over the counter, naloxone nasal spray. Get some, you might save somebody on the street. Thanks a lot. Again, I'm Dr. Joe Kraft, and this is the Medical Minute. Hope you have a great day.